So really my goal today is basically to present you and talk about the financial kind of sector, the impact of the landscape. I will start kind of high level. We'll present what do we have here in 2022, what really happened. Some of those things will be known and clear to most of you. Others, I hope to innovate for some. Then we'll kind of drill down a bit more into the financials, and we'll get hopefully a couple of case studies, a bit what are the more recommended approaches to try and reduce the risk for the threat landscape. I think this first part were already covered by Michael Gerard. I'm not going to speak about myself again. The only thing, I do have quite a lot of experience in cybersecurity, more than 20 years, and I'm enjoying it daily. We'll do, again, a very short introduction for Morphisec, though Michael already presented during the panel. Well, my goal is to reiterate and explain what Morphisec is in this one slide. So Morphisec, again, we are a defense in depth approach. We are providing a very specific focus layer on top of the existing endpoint solutions, CDRs, XDRs, etc., focusing on runtime protection, preventing breaches, preventing ransomwares, preventing stealthier attacks by basically complementing the existing defense layer or defense in depth solutions that you have in the environment, while being installed side by side with the different security solutions. Those could be CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Sophos, Symantec, McAfee, etc. We, as a last layer of defense, we still prevent around 30,000 attacks per day, which is a lot. Protect more than 5,000 businesses and have some of the biggest names in the industry that we are installed on those organizations. Now, kind of starting, as I mentioned, generically. Before we dive into the financials, let's just kind of go through what we had during 2022. Even during the panel, Log4j was mentioned. Log4j was actually on in December 2021. Nevertheless, the impact of Log4j, Log4Shell, and now Text4Shell are still, let's say, big headaches for many CISOs, many security teams, whether it's financials or non-financial institutes. It's tough and difficult to find those assets, those applications dependencies. Even if you use all the tooling possible, you still find quite a lot of applications vulnerable. And as Woody mentioned, we are yet to go through a couple of years until we'll really cover the whole attack surface the best way. As part of supply chain, this is definitely one of the bigger risks and bigger events during end of 2021, 2022. So it's worth mentioning. One of the other events I choose to mention, I think is important, was during the start of the war between Ukraine and Russia, the Conti ransomware leak. Conti was the most dangerous ransomware groups. Together with Logobit is also right now is on the first place. And the leakage of the code of the Conti ransomware by a Ukrainian researcher marked a significant kind of threat landscape mark. A lot of things we found out from those discussions between the group, how the business works better. But essentially the leakage of the code also is good for blue teamers to develop better protection, but it is also good for the attackers because they can reuse code as written right now and create branches of Conti ransomware. So we are expected to see more of those during 2022, 2023. Many of the group members moved to other groups as well, and definitely I would expect to see more there. One of the interesting exploits during 2022, the Folina exploit on the Microsoft Folina exploit, was basically part of the diagnostic tool that you could use to execute malicious code. First, it was utilized a lot in part of the phishing emails, documents that eventually executed through the diagnostic tool, the malicious command. And side by side, together with the additional event that was marked by Microsoft of the disable of macros, this basically to a very smooth transition to a different landscape. Now, the node that Microsoft basically published, disable of macros by default, had a very significant impact on all the threat landscape. Even today, it might sound for some people as a small thing, but it changed really the way many of the threat actors deliver the phishing emails, the attack chains. And exploits definitely, the increase importance of exploits definitely increased due to this notification, but also due to this notification, the phishing shifted to kind of downloading of containers, ISO files, ING files like archive files, etc. Instead of downloading documents. You would have an email with a link that led to download of a container archiving file, which is very hard to scan and delivers the same malware that a macro bot did it. And this kind of change enforced a lot of the CISOs and the security teams to think differently, to shift their thinking, to shift the education of their teams and their organizations, and to develop additional security on top. Additional significant event, again, the geopolitical landscape change, exactly like the COVID shift, it's also impacted on the cyber landscape. Groups have shifted to sites. In some way, ransomware as a service was on a trend up. In some places, some groups basically prefer to contain everything and do all the activities as one group. There are a couple of examples, I will not name those. So due to this geopolitical change, definitely there are some shifting in the ransomware as a service, some shifting in the initial broker access, and some shifting on the delivery of how ransomware is being delivered. Some shift in ransomware to destructive manner, like the wipers that were used in critical infrastructure, and some shift in ransomware to exfiltrate information without encryption. Whether it's due to this shift or due to the changes and moving and split between the different threat actor groups, again, this event had a significant impact on the landscape in 2022. Not long ago, the release of the Logbit builder does provide blue teams better ways to protect, develop better behavior kind of protection patterns, but it also marks kind of and shows those differences that different group members have. And let's say with some effort, people will be able to use even the builder itself and the binary to abuse some of those very advanced techniques and integrate those into other ransomwares. And again, lately, we have the new Exchange 0 Day and the Fortinet exploits that were released in October. And right now also Text4 Shell, definitely big events that will have a following impact. And the 2022 is still not over. I do expect for more interesting things to happen. Definitely an interesting year. Now that we kind of covered the full landscape kind of big milestones during the 2022, diving back into financials, right? Some of those statistics have been mentioned during the panel start, and just think that some of them worthwhile to mention again. Some of the things are very crucial now, right? We definitely see that 23%, 22.4, according to the IBM report, is attacking finances sectors. It's a significant part, right? 23% of cybersecurity attacks attacking finance sectors. So finance, I'm including BFSI, so also insurances, all this industry. Big portion of them attacking banks. We have a portion attacking insurances. I'll present a couple of case studies, very interesting. Some of them are maybe more of you know, CNA, one of the biggest insurance companies, one of the biggest ransomware that was paid during 2021. So definitely a serious vector. During the panel mentioned servers, and I mean, according to the report by FEAR, 90% of those breaches that involve financial industry involve servers, whether it's for exfiltration, lateral movement, and eventually collection of this information and stealing this information. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brian mentioned credential stuffing and lateral movement are a big pain for the financial industries. Even before answer is usually the last one to happen. Some additional very interesting report by VMware suggests to read as well. 74% of financial security leaders experience at least one ransomware attack over the past year. We're talking about almost every enterprise had at least one breach during the year. And 62% of those paid the ransom. So ransomware, as were mentioned by our two guests in the panel, is a pain. It's not the only pain. Credential stuffing, supply chain is also pains. But the end result, I mean, ransomware definitely has an impact. And the financial industry also has an impact with regard to legalization and more, and we'll talk about those as well. Just a bit of the numbers putting here on the table. So we talked about all kind of statistics. that involve really financials. But if we look what is the final kind of impact with regard to breach costs, you see that financial is on the second place after healthcare, though very much protected with multiple agents and nice security posture. We see that, we have here quite a significant impact. And if we focus on the United States, the impact is even higher and can go to $9.4 million. In general, in the world, we are around $6 million impact in average in a breach 2022, which is a significant. Obviously, there are special cases like CNA that we will mention, but in average, 6 million is a significant breach. Now, on the right side, I kind of mentioned the very interesting, again, IBM report mentions what are the different numbers, assuming you're deploying automation and XDR. Many organizations, including financials, are shifting to XDR today, which is also the right way to go. Visibility, orchestration with EDR and network events are important for visibility. And obviously, financial sectors are audited and they need to document and they have to have those visibility, even if event happens. But the point is that even with the deployment of those tools, you still get to almost a year of no detection for breach. So we get to 203 days with the deployed XDR of no detection or until you detect the breach or the incident, and then 72 more days for containing this incident. Obviously, we'll see different kind of ranges. We'll see also months or weeks, but this is kind of the average that was reported by many CISO professionals. And it's an interesting number. It means that definitely it's important to deploy XDR. It reduces the time to detect and time to contain. But what about the rest? So in this case, again, defense in-depth approach is important. We'll talk about how actually Morphisec can help reduce it even further. And 20-30% more, it's a very significant number. It's what can differentiate between being impacted on those $6 million and paying those money or staying without a breach full year. And interesting numbers by Tfir during 2021 heading to 2022. We've seen an increase in system intrusion as an attack vector. Though web applications and social engineering were significant, social engineering will stay significant. As mentioned in the panel, the human factor will always be a human factor. Humans will always do mistakes. Therefore, you always will need a bunch of solutions and education and more to protect against those. But interestingly, system intrusion definitely increased and had the biggest impact during 2021, 2022. The contribution for this system intrusion mostly came in 2021 due to the SolarWinds supply chain and some other supply chains. And then 2022, you had the Log4j as well. If we put aside those supply chains that definitely contributed a significant amount of attacks on the financial sector, then we are still left with email, web applications, and desktop sharing applications on the second part. So still have significant risk, but supply chain is a growing risk that requires solution. And we currently do not have solution. Now that we know a bit about the different statistics, so we'll talk a bit about the different case studies, right? We'll start with a very known for some case study, for some others less known. But again, CNA, as part of the BFSI industry, 40 billion in revenue, 6,700 employees. The ransomware attack, the whole chain caused the exfiltration of 75,349 PIIs, private information that was leaked later on. I'm not even talking about the ransomware. This August, there were private lawsuit against one of the banks. I'll talk about that, specifically focusing on the Graham-Bailey law, which talks about privacy. We'll mention that as well. But exposure of PII can have a long-term impact, which sometimes is hard to even accumulate, count, or sum up. It may be even higher than the impact of dealing with ransomware itself. So in the case of CNA, we have more than 50,000 devices impacted, including machines that were remotely connected through VPN. As soon as they connected, they got encrypted. Obviously, aside of the information that was exfiltrated, the impact of not even using the network was devastating. CNA itself identified the attack only 2 weeks after the attacker already infiltrated and propagated inside the network, inside the servers. The initial access was quite easy. We're talking about a person that got to a malicious website and downloaded the malicious update through the browser. It's all started with one person, and following that, there were propagation in the environment. We'll not get into the details, but during all that time, there were alerts, there were notifications, There were failure to block and quarantine the event. Essentially, between March 20 to 21, attacker decided to deploy the ransomware after disabling the security tools because they had the highest administrative privileges. So it disabled the current next generation NEDR solutions that were in place and then deployed the ransomware. Couple of interesting points here, the negotiation aspect and the incident response plan that were executed. I mean, initially there were requests from the attacker to pay for $55 million. They even said that they will increase the cost. They are not being paid. So essentially CNA paid around $40 million, which was the record sum or the highest sum that was paid then to just restore the network. Interestingly, some of the researchers as part of incident response found the data and the repositories intact and succeeded to get this data. But using obviously the decryptors, CNA succeeded to restore the network. Within 2 months, it took them from the incident to get back to normal. Those 2 months obviously have additional impact on the environment. So we see how one event can have an impact for a couple of months. And right now, I mean, additionally to that, obviously they also introduced monitoring, credit monitoring softwares and others, which also cost money. And obviously additional impacts of negotiation, etc. Definitely interesting case study. I mean, insurances overall are very lucrative target for attackers. They have a lot of IP, a lot of PI, a lot of private information with regard to social security, health, a lot of private information for the insurance companies. It's a nice way as a supply chain to get to some of those companies as well. So we definitely see a lot of those companies being attacked over 2021 and 2022. We have here an example by Pan American Life Insurance Group talking about also, I think it's about 1 or 2 billion revenue, I'm not sure, but we have the Revel Group, 170 gigabyte of PI data. AXA Insurance in Asia hit by Avedon, and the SAM Insurance hit by Hive. And right now, AON Insurance really recently were hit as well, though there is no confirmation if it's hit by ransomware. In total, we're talking about 412 million during 2020 only. It's like an increase of 341% in ransom payments. Quite significant. Additional case study, interesting case study with regard to regulation. I talked about insurance. Just an example from a bank. We have the Flagstar Bank. It's a Michigan-based financial service bank. It was attacked actually the second time during 2021. I mean, they were attacked in starting of 2021 and then at the end of 2021. We're talking about a breach in December. The discovery of the event was only in June. I mean, we are talking about more than half a year of a breached network of a bank, right? A bank with a 1.6 billion revenue, 5,200 employees. During this incident, we have 1,500,000 records exposed, including social securities, healthcare information, and more. There were, following obviously the discovery, identified all kind of traces for the attackers being inside, executing regular tooling. And as I mentioned, just as an example for a long-term impact, only now they were submitted by private citizens against the negligence of maintaining PII in a proper way, especially after second breach. Those regulations and the risk of being sued, obviously the fines are around $100,000 sued through this Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act. There are also motivation for the attackers. Attackers know that the financial sectors will be sued. They understand the importance of PIIs and the fact that there is additional impact, additional cost on the banks. They definitely will continue to attack financials. PCIs, PHIs, and private information have a very high cost in the dark web. So definitely I don't see this disappearing. Now that we have kind of presented a couple of case studies, talk about what are the different, very quickly mentioning, what are the different initial access patterns that we see today, specifically focusing around financials. So overall, if you see all the different initial access, you can also check out MITRE, though it's sometimes less updated. The obvious places will be social engineering. We still see more than 50% social engineering as a first way in, whether you're convinced to open a document or download the ISO or do any of those things. Started from phishing. I think during the panel mentioned phishing as a problem, but phishing can be also smishing and can be also, vectors as well. Supply chain becomes very much significant, whether it's SolarWinds, Log4j, Kaseya, name it. You have a lot. Initial access brokers. It's a big deal. I mean, obviously, whether ransomware as a service or malware as a service, initially you have someone that initial access to the network for some simple things like miners or whatever, and they can resell access, and they do that constantly. Resell access to the bigger groups. Those access sell can range from, a couple of $100s to a couple of $1,000s. And essentially they get even maintenance from the initial access brokers themselves. If there are not enough privileges, let's try to elevate privileges and get you full access. So it's very popular today. In the dark web, you can find quite a lot of those initial access brokers. Brute forcing RDP, it was very popular. Now a bit less, obviously in the financial institutes, even lesser, because they are highly regulated and highly audited. So I would see less and less, obviously, exposed RDP stuff. But exploitations of older VPNs or exploitations of exchanges, of firewalls, this kind of network exposed applications, definitely a vector, not the main vector, nevertheless still a vector. Exploits like Folina definitely were attacking financials. Again, right now it's patched, but it was a vector. Default configurations, I would say that mostly for those that are doing web transition or digital transformation and moving, and I think some of you in the panel mentioned moving to cloud and basically moving the liability. It's definitely an important stage in which you kind of, from one side, reduce the risk, but you also increase the attack surface if you do that the wrong way. And unfortunately, there is not enough expertise. People are doing mistakes in deploying instances where open configurations. Breaches are still happening due to this faulty default configuration transition. So digital transformation basically introduces new attack surface. And obviously stolen credentials, those are resold. Many times people use their private computers and they use their passwords that are not very much different from the passwords they use in the bank. Yes, they might be very long and very interesting, but the variation is not different. And therefore the exposure is serious. Okay, we talked about initial access. Let's see if we take all the malwares. In this case, we use a PICOS report. I love this report. And it's really talking about what are the different trends for malwares. Take all those 200,000 samples of malwares and try to understand what changed. What do we see today? And with regard to the threat landscape, if we map those two techniques, how really malware work today, right? We talked about initial access, but what happens when the initial access happens, right? What happens when the malware runs? What are the places that you should focus? Because those are the most popular things that really successful. They're successful. There are a lot of them because they are successful. So one of the observations from this report, a very important observation, the top techniques after taking those 200,000 malwares and mapping those to MITRE, the top techniques are using defense evasion techniques. So they basically apply defense evasion techniques to evade security solutions, to become and be stealthy, to really succeed in their attack goals. They have to go through defense evasion. And they took 200,000 samples, they validated it, and they find out, again, execution. You take here signed binary proxy execution through legitimate Windows processes, process injection, again, executing through the memory of other applications, basically injecting your malicious execution, stay stealthy, stay fileless, living off the land, stay in memory. So, if this is so successful, why not everyone using it? So everyone are starting to use it because it's so much successful. So 5 of the first one are defense evasion. We also see that at least 4 here of the top 6 techniques are also in memory. Don't have to be evasive and be in memory. But it's the fact that at least 4 are evasive in memory, which means that, again, it works because of challenges of existing security solutions that cannot scan the memory all the time at any given moment. Because again, the state changes all the time. It's very hard to scan all the time. It may have a significant impact on performance. Just a couple of statistics from our database, just looking at specifically focusing around backdoors as a way of persistency, as a way to maintain an entry after the initial access to your organization. Everyone here heard about Cobalt strike, Metasploit as a backdoor. Right now, there is some increase with brute rattle as well, which is full in-memory variant. So we see those obviously a lot, and there's an increase of backdoors all the time. And you can clearly see by the charts, increase of use of Cobalt Strike and Metasploit are significant. And again, those are stealthier in-memory components. So it adheres to that we reported before, talking about defense evasion techniques, in-memory stealthier evasion from security solutions. Now, we present kind of the gap. We'll talk in the next slide a bit more on the gap. Moving target defense, which we are talking about, needs to help reduce the risk to fight against the gap. The gap is essentially those 277 days, as I mentioned in the report, that still we need to minimize, right? The breach cost, we saw, the numbers vary. They can be 4.3, 597, depending on the sector and the industry is significant. So can we reduce this risk further? Can we help to eliminate the next breach that will cost you 4.3 million or 5 or 6 million? I would say yes to many of those cases. Just one more slide. Why is the current security solution are challenged with really solving the in-memory fileless type of techniques or malwares? This is very technical, so I will not get into the images too much. But when the application executes, its state constantly changes. In order to locate and identify malicious code or malicious pattern with this application during execution time, you need to scan the application all the time. You cannot scan the application all the time because it has immediate impact on the system, right? So security solutions said, okay, our scanning of files works, so why not doing the same approach and scanning the memory all the time for similar signatures or patterns? So this is based on hooking. This is based on specific times and points and events. The problem with that is all the visibility lacking. Between those point of time that you scan, you still do not know a lot. So you don't know 99% of the times what happens inside the code. So for the attackers, it's convenient. This is why they use evasion. This is why they use stealthiness. This is why they use memory, because again, they cannot be scanned and they can cherry pick the time that the malicious code executes. So there is a problem. Obviously, they can also tamper and hooks, which is easy, and it's being done again and again and again. So we have a problem. The gap is clear. We also find out that in the financial industries, as well as other industries, there are a lot of stealthy in-memory type of attacks initiated from, again, social engineering, exploitation, child access brokers, etc. We get to a position in which many of those attacks need to go through defense evasion. Many of them are going through memory to evade the detection. So we said, okay, so the current traditional approach doesn't work. You cannot scan all the time. Let's play the cat and mouse with the attacker. Let's change the target system, how it looks like all the time. So we said, okay, you have a different vectors, attack vectors that will for sure get to memory to evade. Let's prevent them there. When they look for something that they think they know, we'll change that. So take an example of a threat vector credential theft. For example, when you target a specific password, take Mimikatz, for example, or browser stealer, info stealer, any of those credential stuffing kind of problems, you specifically target an offset or structure of an application. And when you target that, the structures have been changed, again, by Morphisec. And instead, you find out things that we implanted there, that we left in there. And try to read those, decrypt those, you're being caught. So it's a different approach. Instead of scanning, we're changing the target, and the attacker fails. The same with shellcodes, the same with the exploits and supply chains, similar kind of techniques. We shake the ground beneath the attacker. We change and create the attack surface unpredictable. It's a very different approach because, again, the traditional approach doesn't really work. And with moving target defense, Morphisec succeeds again, prevent many of those stealthy attacks. Getting to the last slide, our perfect optimal solution that can suggest is having those 6 DRs in place, which we saw, according to the different reports, are vital to your security posture, to your visibility, to reduce the attack surface by 30%, more or less, to have obviously your backups working, at least on the servers, and validate those working, apply hardening, and implement moving target defense layer, defense and depth solution in place. As soon as you do that, you basically make your attack surface harder than your neighbors. So basically, just need to be more secure than a different organization. It's easier to be attacked. I hope I showed an interesting kind of view and an interesting innovative approach. And I would love to see if we have questions.
Thanks, Michael. Wonderful information. So I've got a number of questions here. Let's see. First one, you were mentioning moving target defense. Question about what's the advantage of implementing moving target defense for the financial sector?
Yeah, this one is a very good question. Obviously, aside of the efficacy or the protection that you add on top of your existing protection and bridge the gap, the independence of the network, the independence of the updates, of the signatures provides a significant, amazing advantage, because then you can deploy the solution in critical environments that doesn't have to be connected to the network. You don't need to be connected to some kind of a cloud machine learning solution. You'll be protected 100% of the time with your solution. Additional advantages, the performance impact, obviously. When moving target defense, you do not need to scan for signatures all the time. So the impact on scanning is irrelevant. So I will not obviously lie. Any solution have an impact on performance, and anyone that will say otherwise, I wouldn't continue the discussion with him. But it's incomparable to any other solution that is based on scanning, based on identifying behaviors, etc. What we need to know is how your system works and basically morph it in a way during load time. During runtime, there is no impact on the performance of the application whatsoever. Some of our customers, even the biggest financial security customers that we have, actually prefer to deploy Morphisec in many of their critical environments, and in some cases even not deploy the EDR solutions and instead kind of apply segmentation together with Morphisec to provide the best security posture. So performance, the lack of dependence of cloud, the no need of security, additional head count, right? Security or security personnel to identify detection and try to understand what you have. We're talking about prevention approach. All those are very significant advantages to what we deploy today on customer environments.
Thanks, Michael. So I've got time for two more questions here coming in from the audience. Which environments and operating systems is moving target defense helpful with?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. Morphisec uses moving target defense and those advanced defense layered approach into operating systems, which are both Windows and Linux, supporting all the popular distributions, all the popular OSs that you would probably use. Obviously, if you choose to go with something very proprietary, custom, we would need to validate first the support, but most of the biggest support that the system is given. Moving target defense is definitely relevant there in Linux as well as in Windows to prevent similar type of attacks. Code injection, code execution, lateral movement attacks, credential theft, etc., steal theory attacks. So it's really relevant to all those environments that are popular in the financial industry as well as in the other industries.
Thanks, Michael. So one more question here. What are the advantages of combining moving target defense with existing solutions? I think you had mentioned EDRs, XDRs, APPs. Maybe talk a little bit more in detail about the augmentation.
Yeah, I think it's more or less what I described. Again, the existing solutions, EDRs, XDR, are critical to your environment from 2 points of view. One is, hey, you need something to fight against the known threats, right? Known signatures, known behaviors, known patterns. And there are quite enough of attackers that duplicate new attacks and recreate the same signatures or the same behavior patterns. The other one is you need those solutions for visibility, especially in financial industry, for auditing purposes. For later on, you need to know, okay, you had that and that and that, whether this is insider or malware or whatever. But you also need to fight the unknown threats, the steal threat, the in-memory, the fileless type of threat, which is a challenge for existing solution. A combination of those two kind of endpoint solutions. An endpoint, this could be EC2 in the cloud instance. Endpoint is an endpoint, it's an operating system that you can control. The combination of those two approaches will provide you the best security posture in your organization. You will not be 100% protected. I don't think you can get to be 100% protected, but you will have a significant risk reduction with a combination of two approaches that really solve somewhat different problems.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. Been very insightful, valuable. And let's see, appreciate that. Let me share my screen. We'll just finish up here. So once again, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Michael going through our financial industry threat landscape, view from the cybersecurity trenches. And also we had our panel session earlier on banking and finance cybersecurity. So everybody knows that we will make these presentations, everything available in an on-demand format, and you'll get an email about those. And certainly for additional resources, you can check out morphisec.com and look in our resources section, additional learnings. And in particular, there are 3 ebooks that you may be interested in. One is Linux Servers, How to Defend the New Cyber Attack Frontier. You can access that on our website, but also go to tinyurl.com/protect Linux. The second one, there's an ebook that goes much more in detail about moving target defense and how it does augment EPP, EDR, XDR, and JV solutions. And that would be tinyurl.com/stop ransomware. And finally, Michael, our team had mentioned that we do augment Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Defender AV, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, et cetera. We do have a specific ebook that was prepared in collaboration with Microsoft and the Microsoft Defender team. You can check that out at tinyurl.com/MDEP and Morphisec, MDEP and Morphisec.